Okay, so think about someone you know, maybe a child, maybe an adult, whose eating habits are just incredibly rigid. Where every single meal feels like it could become a source of conflict or just stress.
Yeah.
Maybe they only eat foods of a certain color, like white or yellow, or they need specific brands prepared exactly the same way every time.
Hmm.
And you see the stress, right? And you probably worry they're not getting the nutrients they need, and you wonder, is this just like really picky eating, or is it something more serious?
And that severity question, that's where we get into avoidant restrictive food intake disorder, ARFID for short. It's really important to understand this isn't just a preference thing. ARFID is a distinct psychiatric diagnosis. It was actually added to the DSM-5 back in 2013.
Okay.
So the real question we need to tackle for you is, well, where exactly is that line between typical picky eating, the kind lots of kids go through, and a condition where this avoidance becomes, well, pathological?
Right. And that's basically our mission for this deep dive. We're going to try and define that difference by looking at the specific outcomes that signal, clinical impairment.
Mhm.
Then we really need to unpack the role anxiety plays here. It seems like it's a huge driver in keeping this whole avoidance cycle going.
Absolutely.
And finally, we'll switch gears and look at the solutions. What does the research say? What are the evidence-based psychological strategies, especially cognitive behavioral ones, used to actually treat this?
Okay, so when we're trying to separate typical selective eating from ARARD, the absolute key measure is the impact on their functioning and their health. A typical picky eater, yeah, they restrict their diet, usually out of habit or maybe preference, but they don't generally end up with nutritional deficits or severe psychosocial problems because of it.
Right. They might skip the broccoli, but otherwise, they're doing okay. School's fine, friends are fine.
Exactly. But ARFD, that's driven by something deeper, fear, or a really profound aversion to sensory aspects of food, or sometimes just this debilitating lack of interest in eating at all. And that leads to measurable problems. The research points to 4 objective markers of severity, and you only need to meet one of these to suggest a clinical diagnosis might be warranted.
Only one. Okay, so what are they?
Yeah, just one indicates significant functional impairment. So first, documented significant weight loss, or in children, faltering growth not meeting those developmental milestones. Second, a significant nutritional deficiency. We're talking actually being deficient in key things like iron, vitamin D, calcium, stuff like that, proven by tests.
Okay, makes sense.
Third, becoming dependent on nutritional support, like tube feeding or relying heavily on those oral nutritional supplement drinks just to maintain weight or nutrition. And fourth, marked interference with psychosocial functioning. So this means things like being unable to eat with others, extreme distress around social eating situations, that kind of thing. It really impacts their life.
That distinction, the why behind the restriction, that's also critical when you compare ARFID to something like anorexia nervosa, right?
Oh, absolutely vital.
Yeah.
What separates ARFID diagnostically is the documented absence of body image concerns. The person isn't restricting food because they're afraid of gaining weight or they want to change their body shape or size.
The motivation is totally different.
Entirely. In AFID, the restriction is purely about the food itself.
Yeah.
It's phobic, like a fear of choking or vomiting, or it's sensory, an extreme reaction to the texture, smell, maybe even the temperature.
Okay.
And this helps us understand the 3 main ways ARFID tends to show up, the clinical subtypes we often see. There's the acute medical type, usually involves rapid weight loss, maybe medical instability. Then there's the lack of appetite or interest subtype LOA. That's more chronic, like a failure to gain weight over time, just a general disinterest in food. And the third is the sensory subtype. That's where the avoidance is really rooted in extreme sensitivity to the sensory properties of food.
So if we understand that, it really starts to sound like fundamentally this is an anxiety issue that's kind of latched onto food.
The link is undeniable statistically. Clinical studies show really high rates of comorbidity. Research among children and adolescents with AR-IMPD demonstrates that up to, I think it's 53%,
Sure.
also have another diagnosed anxiety disorder.
Wow. Over half.
Yeah. So the restriction isn't some kind of character flaw or stubbornness. It's really a defense mechanism. They're trying to manage what feels like overwhelming fear.
So how does this pattern get so locked in? The cognitive behavioral model seems useful here.
It gives us a really clear framework, yeah. It suggests that if you have an underlying vulnerability, maybe just high trait anxiety, it can lead you to make negative predictions about eating.
Like what?
Like, if I try this new food, I will gag, or I might choke, or this texture will make me feel disgusted. Really strong negative prediction.
And if you believe that, you're obviously going to avoid the food.
Logically, yes, you restrict. And here's the really difficult part. Avoidance feels like it works in the moment. It reduces the immediate anxiety.
But it's a trap.
Exactly. Psychologically, avoidance is the fuel that keeps the anxiety engine running. It prevents the person from ever finding out if their feared catastrophe would actually happen. You avoid, you feel a bit safer temporarily, but that underlying fear, I would have choked, it just stays there untested and often gets even stronger over time.
And what's maybe surprising, especially for parents dealing with this in younger kids, is how that intense fear around food actually looks. It doesn't always look like typical fear, right? Not necessarily shaking or crying.
That is such a critical point for listeners to understand. Those classic defensive responses, fight, flight, freeze, they can look very different with food. It might look like arguing fiercely about dinner, or throwing a tantrum, or suddenly changing the subject, telling a funny story to distract, or just giving that really confusing answer, I don't know, when you ask why they won't eat it.
Huh. So defiance could actually be fear.
It absolutely could. Researchers actually ask kids with these issues to rank their specific food fears, and the top-rated ones, that the food would taste disgusting or that it would cause gagging or vomiting. Primal fears.
Okay, so if the restriction is basically a result of this deep anxiety, this conditioned aversion, then the solution has to involve interrupting that avoidance cycle systematically.
Precisely.
So let's move into the treatments, the evidence-based strategies. The main psychological approach for patients generally aged 10 and up seems to be cognitive behavioral therapy that's been specifically adapted for ARFAD, CBT-AR.
That's right. CBT-AR has several overarching goals, and they really reflect how serious this disorder can be. First, obviously achieve and maintain a healthy weight and correct any nutritional deficiencies. That's paramount. Second, systematically increase exposure to new and different foods. The goal here is to directly challenge and reduce those negative predictions they hold. And third, help the patient feel more comfortable eating in social situations, reducing that psychosocial interference we talked about.
Now, if someone comes in and there's significantly underweight or medically unstable, the first step isn't exposure, right? It's stabilization, stage 1.
Absolutely non-negotiable. If there's medical risk, weight restoration comes first, period.
And how does that work? Because it sounds like it might involve things parents have been told not to do.
Yeah, this is where therapy can feel a bit counterintuitive for families sometimes. The protocol often requires increasing daily calorie intake by at least 500 calories per day. The goal is to support a weight gain of about 1 to 2 pounds per week. And here's the key part. Initially, we often achieve this by having them eat more of their preferred foods.
Even if those foods are things like cookies or chips or ice cream, things usually labeled unhealthy.
Even then, yes, because the immediate priority is physical safety and reducing the physiological stress and anxiety that comes from being underweight or constantly hungry. We need to stabilize their weight, get their body out of starvation mode, eliminate those intense hunger cues that can actually spike anxiety before we ask them to face their deeper fears about new foods.
Okay, so you build the foundation first.
Exactly. Establish regular, reliable eating. 3 meals, 3 snacks a day, often using those preferred foods. Get their body regulated. This is also key for the lack of appetite subtype they need scheduled eating to even relearn hunger and fullness cues.
Makes sense. So once they're stable, then you move into the core psychological work. Stage 3, exposure.
That's the heart of the treatment, yes. Exposure is the mechanism we use to systematically prove the patient's negative predictions wrong. Violate their expectancy, as we say. The therapist works with the patient to create a very careful step-by-step hierarchy of feared foods or maybe feared eating situations.
Like starting small and working up.
Precisely. They confront these challenges gradually, testing the prediction, will I really gag? Will it really be disgusting? And every time they do it, and the feared outcome doesn't happen, the anxiety starts to decrease. They habituate.
Now, for the listeners dealing with the sensory subtype, where it's really about texture or smell aversion, are there specific techniques for that kind of exposure?
Yes, there are. One really practical method is called the 5 steps. It's a way to approach novel foods differently. Instead of just reacting with, ugh, gross, the patient learns to systematically and non-judgmentally describe the food using their senses. What does it look like? How does it feel? What does it smell like? Then eventually, taste and texture.
So it shifts from an emotional reaction to a more objective observation.
Exactly. It makes it cognitive, less about immediate disgust. And patience here is absolutely key. The research suggests it can take 10 or more exposures just interacting with or trying a tiny bit of a food before someone might start to feel comfortable enough to even decide if they actually like it or not.
10 or more times.
Yep.
Wow. That requires persistence.
It really does.
I also came across a technique used by registered dietitian nutritionists called food chaining. That sounds really interesting, kind of like sensory bridging.
Oh, it's a brilliant technique, very effective for gradually expanding a very narrow diet. The basic idea is to link a new food to one of their existing preferred favorite foods based on some shared sensory property.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So let's say a patient loves really crispy potato chips. That's their safe food. The RDN might find a bridge food, like maybe a baked veggie chip, which is also crispy but slightly different. Then from the veggie chip, maybe they move to something like a very thin, crisp, raw carrot stick. You're using that sensory quality, the crispness, as the link, the chain, to introduce the new food.
Or breaking down a complex food.
Yeah, like if they eat plain pasta, but not sauce, you might start with the plain pasta, then add literally 1 drop of sauce, then 2, slowly building acceptance by deconstructing the food and chaining the elements. Very systematic.
And throughout all this, the family's role sounds crucial.
Absolutely critical. A huge part of CBTAR often involves working directly with parents or caregivers. A major focus is reducing what we call family accommodation behaviors.
What does that mean? Like making separate meals all the time?
That's part of it, yes, but it also includes things that seem helpful but actually backfire, like trying to coerce them, bribe them, pressure them, or even hide healthy foods or nutrients inside their preferred foods.
Why are those bad? Parents are often desperate.
I know, and it comes from a place of caring and fear. But those strategies almost always increase the child's anxiety. They erode trust, and you absolutely need trust for exposure therapy to work. The family needs to shift from sort of enabling the avoidance to becoming collaborative partners in the exposure process, supportive, calm, but firm.
Okay. So let's try to synthesize this. What's the main takeaway? ARFID isn't just picky eating, it's a serious condition.
Yes, it's rooted in anxiety and this deeply conditioned aversion, whether that's based on fear, like choking or sensory intolerance, or just lack of interest.
But it's treatable.
Yes, absolutely. The research is actually very positive. We know that multimodal treatment, usually combining psychological therapy like CBTAR with nutritional guidance from an RDN, can lead to remission. People can develop healthy, normalized eating patterns. The critical thing, though, is that treatment has to be highly individualized. It needs to be guided by a really clear understanding, a psychological formulation of what exactly is maintaining the avoidance for the specific person. Is it sensory? Is it fear? Is it lack of interest? You tailor the approach.
Right. And tackling these kinds of deep-seated, anxiety-driven issues like severe food aversion, it really requires specialized help. You need support that understands how to safely and systematically confront that avoidance.
You definitely need an expert guide, someone who can help rewrite those ingrained negative predictions and help establish new, healthier behavioral patterns around food.
So if you or someone you know is struggling with severe food aversion, maybe suspecting ARFAD, Edward Jenny and Associates actually offers specialized services that target these exact mechanisms, the anxiety, the avoidance. They provide psychotherapy, including the cognitive behavioral therapy approaches we've been discussing, all informed by the latest research. And something that seems really valuable is their focus on collaborative assessment. They use these integrated, sophisticated assessments to get insights faster, understanding the triggers, the root causes, which makes the therapy itself more effective and safer too.
That faster insight can make a big difference.
They offer sessions both in person at their office in West Grove, Pennsylvania, and also via telehealth right across Pennsylvania. So accessible options.
Good to know.
So just to leave you with a final thought, think about that core engine of ARFD we discussed. This powerful belief that harm will happen and avoidance feels like the only way to stay safe. If an intense fear of something as basic as food can be learned, biologically ingrained, and maintained like that, what makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other deeply ingrained anxiety-driven patterns might be active in your own life? Maybe it's not food. Maybe it's a fear of public speaking or trying something new career-wise or just certain rigid habits you have. Could those also be resolved just by systematically, maybe with some guidance, testing your own negative predictions, by confronting the avoidance?
Yeah.
The science of exposure therapy suggests that actually facing what you avoid in a structured way is often the most powerful path to learning new safety and breaking free from fear. Something to think about.